Captain Kim Tae-ho pressed his face against the cold glass of the observation deck, his breath fogging the surface as he stared into the endless black of space. 3 months ago, nobody believed the signals were real. The strange patterns picked up by the deep space array seemed too organized, too deliberate to be natural phenomena. Yet here they were, watching impossible ships glide toward their station like dancers in zero gravity. The Valerian vessels defied everything humans understood about spacecraft design. Instead of the bulky, practical shapes that characterized human engineering, these ships looked like they had been grown rather than built. Their surfaces rippled with colors that shifted from deep blue to silver, catching and bending starlight in ways that made Tae-ho's eyes water. Each ship was unique, no two exactly alike, as if they were living creatures rather than machines. Behind him, the station buzzed with nervous energy. Technicians ran final checks on communication equipment while diplomatic staff rehearsed first contact protocols for the 100th time. Everyone knew the weight of this moment. Humanity had dreamed of meeting alien life for centuries, and now it was actually happening. Dr. Park Ji-woo stood at her workstation nearby, fumbling with her xenobiology scanner. Her hands shook slightly as she calibrated the sensitive instruments, designed to analyze alien life forms without causing harm. Sweat beaded on her forehead, despite the station's carefully controlled temperature. She had spent years studying theoretical alien biology, but theory was about to become reality in the most dramatic way possible. The young scientist wiped her palms on her lab coat, leaving damp patches on the white fabric. Her colleagues had nicknamed her the human sprinkler system, because she perspired whenever she felt stressed or excited. Right now, she was both. This moment would either make her career or destroy it completely. There would be no second chances with first contact. Commander Park Min-soo, the station's head of security, moved through the corridors with quiet efficiency. His team had spent weeks preparing for every possible scenario. What if the aliens were hostile? What if their technology accidentally harmed humans? What if something went wrong with the translation systems? His job was to expect the worst while hoping for the best. The translation computers hummed in the background, processing the alien signals and attempting to create a common language framework. The patterns were incredibly complex, unlike anything human databases. Some signals seemed to be mathematical concepts, others appeared to be emotional expressions. The Valerians apparently communicated through a combination of sound, light and electromagnetic pulses that human scientists were only beginning to understand. As the alien ships drew closer, their details became clearer through the station's powerful telescopes. Each vessel was roughly the size of a human cruiser, but their organic curves and flowing lines made them appear both ancient and impossibly advanced. Strange symbols glowed along their hulls, pulsing in rhythm like heartbeats. Some crew members whispered that the ships looked alive, breathing in the vacuum of space. Captain Tae-ho activated the station-wide communication system. His voice echoed through every corridor and compartment as he addressed the 300 humans aboard the orbital facility. They had been chosen from thousands of applicants, representing every nation and discipline on Earth. Linguists, scientists, diplomats, engineers, and military personnel all waited for his words. The moment stretched, like a rubber band about to snap. Outside, the Valerian ships had stopped their approach and now hung motionless in space, as if waiting for permission to come closer. Their hulls continued to shift colors, creating patterns that almost seemed like attempts at communication. The beauty of the display took everyone's breath away. Dr. Ji-woo checked her equipment one final time, her nervous energy making her hands damp with perspiration. She had no idea that this simple human biological response would soon change everything. The salt, proteins, and trace chemicals in human sweat were about to trigger something extraordinary in alien biology, something that would transform two species forever. The alien ships began moving again, approaching the docking bay with careful precision. Inside those crystalline vessels were beings humanity had never imagined, carrying secrets that would challenge everything people thought they knew about evolution, consciousness, and the connections between different forms of life. As the first alien ship connected to the station's docking port, Captain Tejo took a deep breath. History was about to be made, though none of them could have predicted just how dramatically their lives were about to change. The future of two civilizations hung in the balance, waiting for that first moment of contact between species separated by millions of years of evolution. The airlocks began their cycling sequence, and humanity held its breath. The third day of contact started like the previous two, with Dr. Park Ji-woo rushing through the station corridors, clutching her data pad and a steaming cup of coffee. She had barely slept since the Valerians arrived, spending most nights analyzing the incredible biological data they were gathering. Every scan revealed new mysteries about these crystalline beings who seemed to be part organic, part living mineral. What surprised Ji-woo most was how naturally she had fallen into working with Kirillin, the young Valerian cultural liaison. Unlike the other aliens who maintained formal distance, Kirillin showed genuine curiosity about human behavior. She asked endless questions about everything from why humans consumed hot liquids to why they covered their bodies with fabric. Her enthusiasm reminded Ji-woo of her younger sister back on Earth, always eager to learn something new. But something strange was happening that Ji-woo couldn't quite understand. During their morning translation session, she had been explaining human sleep patterns when Kirillin suddenly gasped and stepped backward. The alien's normally blue-silver skin had flashed brilliant gold for just a moment, like lightning caught in crystal. Ji-woo had been gesturing with her hands while talking, and she noticed her palms were damp with nervous sweat. She quickly wiped them on her lab coat, embarrassed by her body's automatic response to stress. Human biology could be so inconvenient sometimes. The pattern repeated throughout the day, every time Ji-woo grew excited, explaining some aspect of human culture. Her body temperature would rise and perspiration would form on her skin, and every single time, Kirillin would react with those strange golden flashes, her large eyes widening as if experiencing something completely foreign. By afternoon, Ji-woo had started paying closer attention to the timing. When she got nervous, during the dietary preferences discussion, and wiped sweat from her forehead, Kirillin's entire arm shimmered gold. When she grew animated explaining human music and worked up a light sweat, the alien's skin patterns shifted to warm amber tones that pulsed in rhythm with her own heartbeat. The other Valerians didn't seem to notice or react to human perspiration at all. Only Kirillin showed these unusual responses, and she appeared increasingly confused by what was happening to her. During their evening translation session in the quiet laboratory, she finally spoke about it directly. Her voice had an otherworldly quality, like wind chimes mixed with flowing water. Every word carried multiple tones that created harmonies in the air. Even through the translation device, Ji-woo could hear the musical nature of Valerian speech, so different from the harsh consonants and flat vowels of human languages. Ji-woo set down her scanner and looked at Kirillin with concern. The alien was sitting very still, her skin cycling slowly between its normal blue-silver and brief flashes of gold. Her large multifaceted eyes reflected the laboratory lights like prisms, creating tiny rainbows on the walls around them. The human scientist had always been self-conscious about her tendency to sweat easily. Back in graduate school, classmates had teased her about it during stressful presentations. She carried tissues everywhere and had tried every antiperspirant on the market. It seemed like such a basic, embarrassing human flaw. But watching Kirillin's reaction, Ji-woo began to wonder if her perspiration was somehow significant. The alien's responses were too consistent, too specific to be coincidental. Something in human sweat was affecting Valerian biology in ways neither species understood. Kirillin's skin suddenly flared bright gold again, and she pressed both hands against her chest, as if trying to contain something powerful. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, a behavior Ji-woo had never observed in any Valerian before. The other aliens maintained perfect control over their respiratory systems, breathing only when necessary for speech. Without thinking, Ji-woo reached out to steady Kirillin, her damp palm making contact with the alien's crystalline arm. The moment their skin touched, something extraordinary happened. Kirillin's entire body erupted in waves of golden light that pulsed outward from the point of contact. The glow was so bright that Jiwoo had to shield her eyes, but more shocking than the light show was what Jiwoo felt in that instant of contact. For just a moment, she could sense Kira Lin's emotions directly. Wonder, confusion, fear, and something else she couldn't identify flooded through her consciousness. It was as if their minds had briefly connected across the vast evolutionary gap between their species. Kira Lin jerked away, her skin now cycling rapidly through colors Jiwoo had never seen before. Deep purples, warm oranges, and brilliant whites chased each other across her crystalline surface like aurora patterns. The alien was trembling, staring at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. The transformation was accelerating, and neither of them understood what it meant. Dr. Lee Sang-min had seen plenty of strange things during his 20 years as a xenobiologist, but nothing had prepared him for the data streaming across his computer screens. He adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the monitor, his coffee growing cold as he studied the impossible readings. The genetic analysis of Kira Lin's tissue samples showed changes happening at a speed that defied everything science understood about biological adaptation. Jiwoo paced nervously behind him, her hands clasped tightly together to prevent more sweating. She had barely slept in 2 days, worried sick about what was happening to her alien friend. The guilt was eating at her alive. Had she somehow poisoned Kira Lin? Was this transformation painful or dangerous? The questions kept spinning through her mind like a broken record. The laboratory felt cramped with all the additional monitoring equipment they had brought in. Machines hummed and beeped constantly, tracking every biological function they could measure. Kira Lin sat patiently in the center of it all, her skin now permanently cycling through colors that had never been documented in any Valerian before. She looked like a living rainbow, beautiful but clearly changed in ways that worried everyone. Sang-min pulled up another screen showing protein analysis. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as he cross-referenced the data with known human biochemistry. What he found made his stomach drop. Human sweat contained dozens of organic compounds that were completely foreign to Valerian biology. Trace amounts of hormones, salt concentrations, and most importantly, pheromones that humans produced without even realizing it. The breakthrough came when he compared Kira Lin's current DNA structure with samples from the other Valerians on the station. Her genetic code was literally rewriting itself, activating sequences that appeared to be ancient and long dormant. It was like watching evolution happen in fast forward, compressed from millions of years into just a few days. Jiwoo stopped pacing and grabbed the back of Sang-min's chair. Her knuckles were white from gripping so tightly. She stared at the genetic readouts without really understanding them, but she could tell from Sang-min's expression that this was bigger than anyone had imagined. The swirling patterns on the screen looked almost artistic, like abstract paintings made of biological data. What made the situation even more mysterious was that Kira Lin didn't seem to be suffering. If anything, she appeared more alert and responsive than before. Her reactions to stimuli were faster, her problem-solving abilities had improved dramatically, and most remarkably, she was beginning to demonstrate capabilities that no Valerian had ever shown before. During yesterday's routine cognitive testing, Kira Lin had correctly predicted which cards Jiwoo would draw from a shuffled deck 7 times in a row. The statistical probability of that happening by chance was astronomical. She was also beginning to respond to Jiwoo's emotions even before the human expressed them verbally, as if she could sense feelings directly. Sang-min pulled up historical data from the Valerian Cultural Database, searching for any references to similar transformations. Most of their records were clinical and scientific, focusing on their current society's achievements in logic and technological advancement. But buried deep in their oldest files, he found fragments of something different. Ancient Valerian texts mentioned a time when their people possessed what they called the deep sight, an ability to perceive emotions and intentions across species barriers. These early Valerians had apparently been incredible empaths, capable of forming bonds with other life forms that transcended normal communication. The records were vague and often dismissed as primitive mythology by modern Valerian scholars. But what if they weren't myths at all? What if early Valerian evolution had included these empathic abilities, only to have them suppressed or bred. Out over thousands of generations, the genetic sequences now activating in Kira Lin matched perfectly with theoretical models of what those ancient capabilities might have looked like at the molecular level. Ji-woo finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She had been thinking about all the moments when Kira Lin seemed to understand her thoughts before she spoke them. The alien would often start answering questions before Ji-woo finished asking them, or would bring up topics that Ji-woo had been thinking about but hadn't mentioned. Kira Lin turned toward them from across the room, even though they had been speaking too quietly for normal hearing to pick up. Her skin shifted to a warm golden color, and when she spoke, her musical voice carried new harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in their chests. Her words sent chills down both scientists' spines. She was talking about memories that weren't her own images of ancient Valerian cities where beings of light worked alongside primitive humanoid species. These weren't just random hallucinations. They were detailed, consistent visions that matched archaeological evidence from worlds both species had discovered but never connected. Sang-min's hands shook as he realized the implications. This wasn't just about one alien's transformation. If human biochemistry could awaken dormant Valerian abilities, it suggested that the two species had a connection spanning back millions of years. Perhaps they had encountered each other before. In the distant past, when both civilizations were young, the awakening was just beginning, and none of them could predict where it would lead. The docking bay fell silent as Ambassador Veltara stepped onto the human station, her crystalline form radiating an authority that made everyone instinctively step back. Unlike Kira Lin's warm, ever-changing colors, Veltara's skin remained a constant pale silver that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She moved with mechanical precision, each step calculated and deliberate, flanked by 6 Valerian guards whose imposing presence filled the space with tension. Captain Kim Tae-ho had dealt with difficult diplomats before, but nothing had prepared him for the ice-cold intelligence behind Veltara's multifaceted eyes. She scanned the assembled humans like a predator evaluating prey, her gaze lingering on each face before moving on. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the musical qualities that made Kira Lin's speech so pleasant. Instead, it was sharp and cutting, each word delivered with surgical precision. Dr. Park Ji-woo felt her heart racing as she watched the ambassador's reaction to Kira Lin. The young Valerian stood quietly near the laboratory entrance, her skin cycling through nervous patterns of blue and gold. Even from across the docking bay, Ji-woo could see that Kira Lin was afraid. Her usual confident posture had crumbled, replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone expecting punishment. The word contaminated hit Ji-woo like a physical blow. She had spent the last week watching Kira Lin grow stronger, more capable, more alive than ever before. The transformation had been beautiful to witness, like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. To hear it described as contamination felt like having her life's work dismissed as meaningless. Veltara's escort began moving through the station with practiced efficiency, scanning everything with devices that hummed with alien technology. They treated the human facility like a crime scene, searching for evidence of what they clearly considered a dangerous outbreak. Their movements were synchronized and cold, showing none of the curiosity or wonder that had characterized Kira Lin's exploration of human culture. The ambassador herself approached the group of scientists and diplomats gathered near the main conference room. Her silver skin rippled with patterns that Ji-woo had never seen before, geometric shapes that seemed to represent authority and judgment. When she gestured toward Kira Lin, the motion was sharp and dismissive, as if indicating something distasteful that needed to be removed. Captain Tae-ho stepped forward, his military training helping him maintain composure despite the obvious threat. He had commanded space stations for 15 years and knew how to handle hostile situations, but this felt different. The Valerians weren't just angry, they were afraid. Fear made everyone dangerous, whether human or alien. Ji-woo couldn't stay quiet any longer. The scientific part of her mind was outraged by the ignorance she was witnessing. These Valerians were looking at one of the most remarkable biological transformations ever documented and calling it contamination. It was like watching someone destroy a priceless work of art, because they didn't understand its value. Her voice cracked with emotion as she defended her friend. Over the past week, Kira Lin had become more than just a research subject or alien. Contact. They had shared late-night conversations about the differences between their species, laughed together at cultural misunderstandings, and formed a bond that transcended the vast evolutionary gap between them. Veltara's response was immediate and harsh. Her skin flashed with angry silver patterns as she explained the Valerian Council's position. According to their records, the abilities that Kira Lin was developing had been deliberately eliminated from their species thousands of years ago. They represented a chaotic, uncontrolled period in Valerian history when emotions ruled over logic. The ambassador described ancient times when Valerians had been slaves to their feelings, making irrational decisions based on empathic connections rather than careful analysis. Wars had been fought over emotional disputes, resources had been wasted on sentimental attachments, progress had stagnated because Valerians were too busy feeling to think clearly. Their solution had been radical, but effective. They had used genetic manipulation to suppress the empathic abilities that caused so much chaos. Over generations, they had bred out the capacity for deep emotional connection, creating a society based on logic, efficiency, and rational thought. It had brought them peace, prosperity, and technological advancement beyond anything their ancestors had achieved. But now a human's simple biological function was undoing thousands of years of careful genetic engineering. Kira Lin was regressing to their species' primitive state, developing abilities that the Council considered dangerous and obsolete. From their perspective, she was diseased and needed immediate treatment before the condition could spread to other Valerians. Captain Tejo realized that this wasn't just about one individual anymore. If the Valerian Council was willing to use force to retrieve Kira Lin, it meant they saw human contact as an existential threat to their entire civilization. The stakes had just escalated from a diplomatic incident to a potential war between his species. The confrontation was intensifying, and neither side seemed willing to back down. Dr. Yoon So-ra had been working for 18 straight hours, surviving on nothing but coffee and determination. The neurological scans spread across her multiple monitors showed patterns she had never seen in 30 years of studying the human brain. What was happening between Jiwoo and Kira Lin defied every textbook, every theory, every fundamental principle of how consciousness was supposed to work. The breakthrough came at 3 in the morning, when So-ra was analyzing the synchronized brainwave patterns. Both women were sleeping in the medical bay, their beds positioned side by side for continuous monitoring. Even unconscious, their neural activity was matching in ways that should have been impossible. When Jiwoo's brain entered REM sleep, Kira Lin's alien neural structures activated in perfect harmony. So-ra rubbed her tired eyes and ran the analysis again, certain she had made a mistake. But the data remained consistent. The two beings were developing what could only be described as a shared consciousness network. Their brains were learning to communicate directly, bypassing normal sensory channels and creating a connection that operated at the speed of thought itself. When both women woke up, So-ra could barely contain her excitement. She practically dragged them to her laboratory, chattering rapidly about quantum entanglement theories and neural bridge formation. Jiwoo looked exhausted but curious, while Kira Lin's skin displayed patterns of confusion mixed with wonder. The alien was experiencing sensations that had no equivalent in her native language. The first test was simple. So-ra asked Jiwoo to close her eyes and think about something specific, while Kira Lin described what she was sensing. The results were immediate and undeniable. When Jiwoo concentrated on her childhood bedroom back on Earth, Kira Lin began describing details she couldn't possibly have known. The faded blue wallpaper with tiny stars, the wooden desk by the window, even the smell of her mother's cooking drifting up from the kitchen below. But the connection worked both ways. When Kira Lin focused on memories of her homeworld, Jiwoo gasped and pressed her hands to her temples. Suddenly, she could see vast crystal forests stretching to alien horizons, their surfaces singing with harmonics that human ears couldn't normally detect. She felt the different gravity, the strange texture of the atmosphere, even the emotional resonance that the crystal formations created in Valerian minds. The experience was overwhelming for both of them. Jiwoo had to grip the edge of the examination table to steady herself as alien sensations flooded her consciousness. The crystal forests weren't just beautiful, they were alive in ways that Earth's vegetation could never be. Each formation carried memories, emotions, and experiences from countless generations of Valerians who had touched them throughout history. Kirilin's skin began cycling through rapid color changes as she struggled to process human memories and sensations. Earth's chaotic weather patterns, the feeling of rain on skin, the complex social dynamics of human families, all of it was foreign and intense compared to the ordered, controlled environment of Valerian society. Sora documented everything with growing amazement. The neural link was strengthening by the hour, creating pathways between two completely different types of consciousness. Human brains processed information through electrical and chemical signals, while Valerian neural structures operated through crystalline resonance patterns. The fact that they were learning to interface at all was miraculous. As the day progressed, the connection deepened beyond simple memory sharing. Jiwoo began to understand concepts that had no human equivalent, the way Valerians perceived time, as a flowing crystal river, rather than a linear progression. Their ability to sense the emotional history of objects through touch, their complex relationship with harmonic frequencies that served as both communication and art. In return, Kirilin experienced human emotions with an intensity that left her overwhelmed. The chaotic, passionate nature of human feelings was completely different from the controlled, logical responses she had been raised to value. Joy, anger, love, fear, all of them crashed through her consciousness like storms on an alien ocean. The most profound moment came when they simultaneously realized what was happening. This wasn't just a random biological accident caused by human pheromones. The genetic sequences awakening in Kirilin were specifically designed to create these connections. Her ancestors had possessed the ability to form deep psychic bonds with other species, and human biochemistry was the key that unlocked these dormant capabilities. Kirilin's voice carried new harmonics as she spoke about her people's fears. The Valerian Council hadn't just eliminated emotional chaos from their society, they had deliberately severed their species' ability to connect meaningfully with other forms of life. They had chosen isolation over the messy, complicated, wonderful experience of true interspecies understanding. Outside the medical bay, the political situation was deteriorating rapidly. Ambassador Veltara's ships were taking aggressive positions around the station, demanding Kirilin's immediate return. But inside the laboratory, two beings from different worlds were discovering that consciousness itself might be far more flexible and wonderful than anyone had ever imagined. The bond between them was growing stronger every moment, and with it, the possibility of something entirely new in the galaxy. The peaceful morning on the orbital station shattered like glass when the first alarm began wailing. Chief Communications Officer Park Min-jun was enjoying his second cup of coffee when every screen in the communications center exploded with warnings. Red lights flashed throughout the station as automated systems detected massive energy signatures appearing at the edge of the solar system. At first, Min-jun thought it was a malfunction. The readings were so far outside normal parameters that the computers kept flagging them as impossible. But as more sensors came online, the horrifying truth became clear. Something enormous was emerging from hyperspace, tearing holes in reality itself with technologies that defied human understanding. Captain Kim Tae-ho rushed to the command center, still buttoning his uniform jacket. The main view screen showed long-range sensor data that made his blood run cold. 12 massive objects were materializing from the void, each one larger than the biggest human battleships. But these weren't constructed vessels. They looked grown, twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly. The ships resembled enormous parasites or deep-sea creatures pulled from humanity's worst nightmares. Their hulls pulsed with sickly bioluminescent patterns, and appendages writhed along their surfaces like tentacles searching for prey. Most disturbing of all, the sensor readings showed they were partially alive, combining organic tissue with technologies that registered as impossibly advanced. Tejo had commanded military vessels for 20 years, facing pirates, rebels, and territorial disputes across human space. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for the primordial terror that gripped him as he watched these abominations approach. Every instinct screamed that these beings were wrong on a fundamental level, predators that viewed all other life as nothing more than food. The station's artificial intelligence began cross-referencing the energy signatures with every database in human and Valerian records. What it found buried in the oldest Valerian archives made the situation infinitely worse. These were devourers, a species that both civilizations had assumed was extinct for thousands of years. According to the ancient records, devourers were the galaxy's ultimate parasites. They consumed not just flesh and technology, but consciousness itself. Entire civilizations had vanished without trace when these creatures appeared, leaving behind only empty worlds stripped of all life and intelligence. They were living nightmares that fed on the psychic energy generated by thinking beings. Ambassador Veltara's face appeared on the emergency communication channel, her usual cold composure cracking for the first time since she had arrived. Her silver skin flickered with patterns of fear and disbelief as she processed the sensor data. The mathematical precision of her species' thinking was struggling to accept something that shouldn't exist. Her voice carried undertones of terror that made even the human crew members shiver. The Valerians had legends about the Devourers, stories so frightening that they were usually dismissed as primitive superstitions. But those legends spoke of creatures that could drain the life force from entire star systems, leaving nothing but cosmic graveyards in their wake. The worst part was realizing why they had appeared now. The psychic resonance created by Jiwoo and Kirilin's neural link, combined with the gathered fleets of both species, had acted like a beacon in the void. The Devourers were drawn to consciousness the way sharks were drawn to blood in water. The stronger and more complex the minds, the more attractive they became as prey. Down in the medical bay, both women suddenly convulsed as alien thoughts crashed into their shared consciousness. Through their neural link, they could feel the Devourers' approach like ice water flooding their minds. The creatures' thoughts were voids of hunger and hatred, empty spaces that consumed everything they touched. Jiwoo screamed and grabbed her, head as waves of alien malevolence washed over her. The sensation was like drowning in liquid darkness, surrounded by intelligences that viewed her as nothing more than a morsel to be devoured. Kirilin's skin flashed between colors so rapidly it became a blur, her crystalline form struggling to process the psychic assault. Through their connection, both women experienced flashes of the Devourer's memories, worlds reduced to lifeless husks, civilizations that had fought desperately before being consumed, the screams of countless beings as their consciousness was torn away and digested. The creatures had been hibernating in the void between galaxies, waiting for sufficient psychic energy to awaken their hunger. Captain Tejo watched the tactical display with growing desperation. The human fleet consisted of 3 escort vessels and a research ship, designed for exploration rather than combat. The Valerian ships were more advanced, but fewer in number. Against 12 Devourer vessels, they were hopelessly outmatched. But the real horror was yet to come. As the alien ships drew closer, their influence began affecting both fleets. Crew members reported nightmares while awake, seeing visions of their own deaths and the destruction of everything they held dear. The Devourers were already feeding, draining psychic energy from everyone within range. The battle for survival was about to begin, and neither species was prepared for what they faced. Chief Engineer Cho Min-ho had always been good under pressure, but today was testing every limit he thought he had. Sparks flew from damaged control panels as he rerouted power systems throughout the station, his hands moving with desperate precision across keyboards and manual controls. Outside the reinforced windows, space lit up with weapons fire as human and Valerian ships fought for their lives against enemies that seemed to know their every move before they made it. The engineering deck shook violently as another explosion rocked the station. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows, while alarms wailed continuously in the background. Minho's team worked around him with the focused intensity of people who knew they were humanity's last hope. If they couldn't find a solution in the next few minutes, everyone in the system would be dead or worse. Dr. Park Ji-woo and Kira Lin arrived in the engineering section looking like they had been through hell. Both women were pale and shaking, their neural link making them hypersensitive to the psychic assault the Devourers were broadcasting. Every time one of the alien ships fired its weapons, they felt the malevolent joy of the creatures as they destroyed their prey. Minho barely looked up from his work as he explained his desperate theory. The station's weapon systems were designed to be controlled by a single operator using conventional targeting computers. But those systems were useless against enemies who could read the operator's thoughts and dodge accordingly. They needed something the Devourers couldn't predict or understand. The hybrid consciousness that Ji-woo and Kira Lin had developed operated on frequencies that were completely alien to both species' normal thought patterns. It was a unique blend of human intuition and Valerian logic, processed through neural pathways that had never existed before in the galaxy's history. If Minho was right, it might be the one thing the Devourers couldn't penetrate or predict, but the cost would be enormous. Opening their minds completely to each other meant abandoning all the mental barriers and privacy that thinking beings normally maintained. They would share not just thoughts and memories, but their deepest fears, most embarrassing moments and darkest secrets. There would be no hiding anything from each other ever again. Ji-woo looked at Kira Lin through eyes that were already filling with tears. The idea of complete mental fusion terrified her on a level she could barely understand. What if she lost herself entirely in the process? What if the alien thoughts and memories overwhelmed her human consciousness? But as another explosion shook the station, she realized they had no choice. Outside, the battle was going worse than anyone had imagined. The human defense force cruiser Seoul erupted in flames as Devourer weapons tore through its hull like tissue paper. Captain Park Jae-sung had been a friend of Taiho's for 15 years, and watching his ship die was like losing a brother. The Valerian vessels were faring slightly better, but their elegant crystal ships were being systematically destroyed by enemies who anticipated every defensive maneuver. Ambassador Veltara's voice crackled over the communication system from her flagship, but for the first time since arriving, she sounded genuinely frightened. Her revelation about the Devourers reading their thoughts explained everything. Why their formations collapsed before they could be completed. Why their weapons missed targets that should have been easy hits. Why every tactical decision led to disaster. The Valerians' natural psychic abilities, which had always been a source of pride and advantage, were now being turned against them. The Devourers were using their own mental emanations as a window into their strategies and intentions. Every thought, every plan, every desperate hope was being broadcast directly to their enemies like a tactical briefing. In the engineering section, Minho finished his modifications to the targeting system. Banks of crystalline processors that had been borrowed from Valerian technology hummed with power, ready to interface with the unique neural link between the two women. Red warning lights flashed as he bypassed safety systems that were never meant to be overridden. Ji-woo and Kira Lin approached the modified control station hand in hand, their fingers intertwined so tightly that their knuckles were white. The targeting chair had been equipped with neural interface nodes that would amplify their connection and feed it directly into the station's weapon systems. It looked more like a torture device than salvation, but it was their only chance. Kira Lin's skin cycled through colors that represented determination mixed with terror. Her musical voice was barely audible over the battle sounds as she tried to reassure Ji-woo, but they both knew the risks. Complete mental fusion between two different species had never been attempted before. They might emerge from the process as something entirely new, or they might not emerge at all. As they settled into the targeting chair together, Minho made final adjustments to the neural interface. Around them, the station shuddered under increasingly heavy fire. Time was running out for everyone, and their desperate gamble was about to begin. The fate of two civilizations rested on a connection that had started with nothing more than nervous human sweat. The morning shift change on Station Harmony had become Captain Kim Tae-ho's favorite time to observe operations. Through the massive observation windows, he could see the bustling activity of what had grown from a simple research outpost into the galaxy's most important diplomatic hub. Ships from dozens of worlds docked regularly, their crews eager to learn about the revolutionary bonding process that was transforming interspecies relations across known space. The station itself had evolved far beyond its original design. Human engineering sections now featured flowing organic curves inspired by Valerian architecture, while Valerian crystal gardens incorporated chaotic natural elements that reflected human aesthetic preferences. The fusion of design philosophies created spaces that felt both familiar and wonderfully alien to visitors from either species. Tejo smiled as he watched a mixed crew of humans and Valerians working together to repair a damaged docking port. 6 months ago, such cooperation would have been impossible. The language barriers alone would have made coordination nearly hopeless. But now, bonded pairs moved with the synchronized precision of dancers, communicating through subtle changes in skin color, body language, and the kind of intuitive understanding that came from shared consciousness. The transformation hadn't been limited to just humans and Valerians. Word of the synthesis had spread throughout the galaxy, drawing delegations from species that had remained isolated for centuries. The crystalline chorus from the Andromeda sector had arrived last week, their silicon-based biology proving surprisingly compatible with human biochemistry. Even the mysterious deep dwellers had sent representatives, emerging from their ocean worlds for the first time in recorded history. Dr. Park Ji-woo's entrance into the observation deck interrupted Tejo's thoughts, though he had learned to sense her approach before she actually appeared. The neural pathways created by her bond with Kira Lin had subtle effects on everyone around them, creating a field of enhanced empathy that made the entire station feel more connected and harmonious. Ji-woo herself had changed dramatically over the past 6 months. The nervous, sweating scientist who had accidentally triggered the first transformation was now one of the galaxy's leading experts on interspecies bonding. Her skin carried faint patterns that resembled Valerian color speech, appearing whenever she was deep in thought or experiencing strong emotions. The changes were beautiful rather than alarming, like living tattoos that reflected her inner state. Kira Lin followed close behind, her movements fluid and graceful in the way that had become characteristic of transformed Valerians. Her emotional range had expanded to encompass feelings that her species had forgotten existed. But rather than making her chaotic or unstable, the changes had brought a depth and richness to her personality that amazed everyone who knew her. The datapad Kira Lin carried contained the latest reports from across the galaxy, each one documenting new breakthroughs in interspecies cooperation. The synthesis wasn't just creating individual bonds between beings, it was fundamentally changing how different civilizations related to each other, breaking down barriers that had existed for millions of years. Ambassador Veltara had become one of the most enthusiastic advocates for the bonding process, despite her initial horror at Kira Lin's transformation. Her own change had been dramatic. The cold, logical diplomat had developed a capacity for joy and wonder that transformed her interactions with everyone around her. She now served as the chief liaison between the Valerian Council and the growing network of bonded species. The success stories kept pouring in from across known space. The trade wars between the hegemony and the free worlds had ended when bonded negotiators helped both sides understand each other's underlying needs and fears. The plague ravaging the Outer Rim colonies had been cured through collaborative research between species that had never shared knowledge before. Even the ancient conflict between the Star Dancers and the Void Walkers was showing signs of resolution. But perhaps the most remarkable development was the emergence of hybrid vessels like the one visible through the observation windows. The ship New Dawn represented a complete fusion of human and Valerian technology, its organic crystal hull capable of both faster-than-light travel and conscious decision-making. The crew didn't just operate the ship, they communed with it, creating a symbiotic relationship that pushed the boundaries of what anyone thought possible. Tejo listened as Ji-woo and Kira Lin discussed their latest project, establishing bonding centers on 12 new worlds, each one staffed by pairs who had undergone the synthesis. The demand was so great that they could barely keep up with requests for assistance. Every successful bonding created ripple effects throughout local space, as the enhanced empathy and understanding spread to unbonded individuals through proximity and interaction. The captain found himself thinking about the strange chain of events that had brought them to this point. A simple biological function, human perspiration, had accidentally triggered the greatest evolutionary leap in galactic history. What had started as an embarrassing quirk of human physiology had become the key to unlocking potential that most species didn't even know they possessed. The future stretched ahead full of possibilities that no one could have imagined just months before.